Friends, I'm not sure about you, but for me, November 29, 2020 feels a bit like entering the last leg of a marathon. Not that I've ever done a marathon, although I did do 2 halves this year, a week apart, which may not have been the smartest, but it was fun. And in each of those half marathons, I arranged it so that the last few hundred metres were slightly downhill. In other words, the hardest part was over. And this year, on this day, it feels like the hardest part has been done and we're on the way home. We're at the back end of a year that has been unusual, to say the least, and unparalleled in my lifetime. It's been a year that has required some careful and courageous and wise navigation by leaders of our state and country, as well as committed partnership of people all around Australia. But today is also the first Sunday of Advent, a season that for many serves to help us anticipate the significance of an event that changed history forever, the birth of Jesus. However, that's only part of the Advent season story. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor and theologian who was seeking to help overthrow Hitler and who was killed by the Nazis just before the end of World War II, pressed deeper into the meaning of this season when he wrote, "The celebration of Advent is possible only to those who are troubled in soul, who know themselves to be poor and imperfect, and who look forward to something greater to come." Friends, does that resonate with you at the end of this year? Are you looking forward to something greater to come? It resonates with me, and it also sounds remarkably like the passage we're reading today from the prophet Isaiah. In chapter 9, it's a passage written almost 8 centuries before Jesus' birth, a passage that anticipates something greater for the people of Israel. And I'd love to read it with you from Isaiah 9 and verses 2 to 7. "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You've enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you've shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." Here is a word picture painted by the prophet that is a great celebration of hope in the face of impending disaster for the nation of Israel. It looks like they'll be invaded by the Assyrian army. Doom and gloom would be understating the situation. The mood of the people is very low as they face the prospect of not only the death of many, but invasion and being marched into exile. Isaiah's words, cast in the form of a poem or a song, seek to shift the gaze of the people from the present to the future, to what God will do to set things right. It's interesting that these words are also in the past tense, as though it had already happened. And from God's perspective, it is as good as done. It's a celebration of hope. Isaiah sees light dispelling darkness, joy replacing death, deliverance replacing oppression. Sounds great. But when and how will this happen? Isaiah stuns his listeners with the answer that it will happen through the birth of a child. I don't know about you, but if I heard that, I'd be thinking, are you kidding me? No way can a child deliver a nation from marauding foreign armies, let alone anything else. But that's what the prophet says. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. The author, Ray Ortlund, summarises it this way. He says, God's answer to everything that has ever terrorised us is a child. The power of God is so far superior to the Assyrians and all the big shots of the world that he can defeat them by coming as a mere child. His answer to the bullies swaggering through history is not to become an even bigger bully. His answer is Jesus. Friends, our Advent series is entitled, He Shall Be Called. And for the next 4 weeks, we will look at the 4 names outlined in verse 6 of this passage and given to a child who would establish a forever kingdom and whom we know as Jesus. When I was born, I was given the names William Alexander. I reckon it sounds regal, doesn't it? You may know that when someone is called William, the name is often shortened to Bill. Not long after I was born, some of my mum's friends said, "Surely you're not going to call the baby Bill, are you?" My mum responded beautifully with, "Wait until you see the baby and it won't matter what we call him." I imagine that you've heard the question, what's in a name? It's suggesting that the name of a thing or a person doesn't matter as much as the quality of the thing or the person. Shakespeare used this phrase in his famous play Romeo and Juliet, where he talked about a rose, if called something entirely different, would still smell as sweetly as it does with the name Rose. My name's William Alexander mean protector and defender of people. I love the inspiration of the names and I aspire to live up to it, but am the first to admit that I haven't always done so. What's in a name? Well, Isaiah tells us that the child who would establish an eternal kingdom, a just and righteous kingdom, that child would have 4 names. It wasn't unusual for kings in that era to have multiple names, as it still is for kings or queens today to adopt a throne name or 2. But let me ask you, when you hear that someone has 4 names, where does your mind go? Do you, like me, think of filling in forms for the rest of your life with 4 given names, each of which has 2 parts? Or maybe you think, what do these names tell us about this child? The first name given to the child is Wonderful Counselor. Now, literally, these words could be translated a wonder of a counsellor, or an extraordinary counsellor, or even a counsellor of wonders, or a wonder planner, or a wonder working planner, or one who counsels amazing, life-changing, life-directing, or redirecting approaches. Here in this passage, the term counsellor doesn't mean a therapist as much as it does a strategist. And in the ancient world, a counsellor was someone who devised plans to win military victories. Wonderful Counselor is a way of talking about how God's plans and God's purposes breathe life into us and fill us with wonder, causing us to say, wow. You know, when I use the word wow, it's because words fail me as I find it hard to comprehend what just happened or what I just experienced. It might be when you see a beautiful sight that takes your breath away, or you smell the delightful fragrance of a rose. Like down our driveway, we've got a row of roses, and there's one in particular, a red rose. And the aroma is amazing, and I find myself often stopping to smell it and declaring, wow. Or maybe it's when you see the birth of your child, or you gain an insight that blows your mind and opens a doorway into something that you never thought was possible. I found myself saying, wow, at some funerals recently. When I reflected on the amazing contribution that the deceased person had made in the lives of others. When you utter, or I utter, wow, there's a sense that time stands still. And for a moment or two, you're mesmerised as you think about and ponder and try and take in all that you're experiencing. That's the strength of this name, Wonderful Counsellor. This child, whom we call Jesus, is a wonderful counsellor. He's full of wisdom and knowledge and shows us God's wonder-filled wisdom for the world. He's a great strategist for navigating life and embracing opportunities and responding well to challenges. It's not a surprise that centuries after Isaiah spoke these words, we read in the biographies of Jesus, the books that we call the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, that people were amazed and marvelled at Jesus' actions and words and responses. His strategies for life invited people into a wonder-filled way of living. We hear Jesus numbers of times saying things like, "You have heard it said," and he tells what they would have heard in the past. And then he says, "But I say to you," and he amplifies or expands or stretches their understanding. Jesus' perspective often took people by surprise and opened their ways to new ways of seeing the world. We have around 330 questions recorded that Jesus asked. He aroused people's curiosity in the way that he lived and acted, and his questions helped people own the best strategy and choose the wise thing to do. Usually, the pathway of a great or a powerful person becomes increasingly complex and busy. This never happened to Jesus. Despite being enormously popular, he chose a strategy of a simple lifestyle that allowed him to stay accessible to normal people. He ate what others ate. He stayed in the homes of friends. He travelled on roads that everyone did so he could connect. He took a basin and a towel and the posture of a slave to wash the feet of his friends to establish the value that people matter more than things. His lifestyle, his strategy was about loving people. At his death, he left only one thing. He'd really decluttered, not that he ever had much. And at his death, there was a blood-stained robe. And the blood on his robe was voluntarily shed so that the stains of our lives could be washed away. When severely beaten and spat upon and mocked and ridiculed and treated unfairly, he responded with grace and forgiveness. No wonder the centurion, overseeing the crucifixion of Jesus, exclaimed, "Surely this man is the Son of God." It was a wow. I'm not sure that I comprehend all that I've just witnessed. You know, as a child, I met this wonderful counsellor. Because not only did he die, but he rose from the dead and is alive forever. I saw the way that trust in this wonderful counsellor, partnership with him, walking with him, informed and permeated every aspect of life for my mum and dad. As I got to know him, this wonderful counsellor, he helped give perspective and purpose to my life. Sure, there have been times when I've tried to strategise without consulting or checking in with him, and it's left me frustrated and disappointed. But to walk with him through life, and he invites us to do that, to surrender to his ways and plans, mean that the wows continue and we discover that he's indeed a wonderful counsellor. His plans are not always what you would expect, but they're always good. They're grace-filled, they're truth-telling, and they're infused with delight and surprise. We find his strategies. There's strength in times of weakness. There's blessing in seasons of brokenness. There's being lifted up and empowered when serving humbly. There's comfort in periods of suffering, and there's even life in the midst of death. All because of Jesus, the wonderful counsellor. It's counterintuitive, I know. But to follow his strategies is to follow the way of deep and lasting joy. When Jesus came to earth, he was the God-man, fully God and fully man. He was a portrait of God and a portrait of what humans are meant to be. It's a mystery. It's a wow. He was brilliant and creative and paradoxically humble and subject to tiredness and hunger and frustration, but never giving in to temptation. He was and is an extravagant lover of people, generous, forgiving and accepting, and he knew what suffering and struggle was all about. There's nothing that we face today for which his strategy or his counsel is inadequate or inappropriate. Rather, to submit to and surrender to his word and his ways is to be able, in hindsight, to declare without hesitation, he is wonderful counsellor. Wow. That's why he declared, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and the gospel will save it." You know, it was this principle that prompted Jim Elliot decades ago. Jim was a missionary who was martyred for his faith. But it was this principle that prompted him to say, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Counterintuitive? Absolutely. But full of deep and lasting joy and investing in people and causes that change lives forever, such that again and again you can say, "Wonderful counsellor." Wow. Do you want a little Advent assignment in the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas? It'd be a great way to prepare. I want to encourage you to immerse yourself in one or two of the 4 Gospels. And as you do, walk with the wonderful counsellor. Watch how he does it. Check his strategies. At the start of every day, enrol afresh in his school and learn the unforced rhythms of grace, learning to live freely and lightly and partnering with him in his mission. There'll be some wows if you do that. I wonder whether there's anything that you're facing today or navigating at the moment. And to hear that Jesus is wonderful counsellor gives you hope that there may be a helpful way forward. There is nothing that you and I face that he doesn't have some amazing counsel and strategy for us. And I want to encourage you to join with me as we pray a prayer that you might want to take a photo of or a picture of and use as a prayer for Advent. It goes this way. God of hope, wonderful counsellor, I look to you with an open heart and a teachable spirit. During this season of Advent, help me keep alert and awake, walking with you, listening for and obeying your word and counsel. My hope is in you. And for those for whom this season is particularly dark, help me to be a person of hope and blessing for them. And as opportunity arises, introducing them to the wonderful counsellor. Amen. Friends, you couldn't do better than engaging with the wonderful counsellor around whatever your situation. And to share the situation with a trusted friend, or if you're watching this on live stream, someone in our prayer room, is a great way to engage with Jesus, wonderful counsellor. May God bless you this Advent season.